Okay, great. I have a couple of questions for you, but
Mhm.
before I get to those, could you just do like a brief introduction of yourself?
Sure. My name is Ed Gore. I'm currently the National Director of the Chinese American World War II Veterans Congressional Gold Medal Recognition Project. And this project was started by me back in 2016 when I was National President of Chinese American Citizens Alliance. So CACA, the acronym, was formed in 1895 as a response to the mistreatment of the Chinese railroad workers. As you can recall, back then when the railroad workers were finished doing their work, many people scapegoated them for all the ills of the country, the economic ills, similar to what's happening today, I guess, in a sense. But Chinese American Citizens Alliance came to, I guess, their rescue is what I'd say, to advocate for them, to advocate for their civil rights, for their freedoms, for just mistreatment. And many don't know that over the period of years, going into the 1900s, many Chinese were actually killed or mistreated and beaten during the time that they were in California and the Western states, is where most of them were. So, as far as myself goes, I don't. I actually have a STEM background. So when you say why am I involved with this at all, and the answer to that question really is I'm not a military person. I'm not a veteran. I'm not any of those things you might say you would associate someone who's kind of interested in this project. I actually started when I was national president of CACA because when I was touring the country, visiting our various chapters, lodges in about the 20 cities we had, the one thing I noticed was that everyone who was a an older member, in other words, if you have an organization, people always pay dues, right? So I would say to myself, as a person who's paying dues, what am I getting for my dues? When I'm a member of anything, it doesn't matter what you're a member. I don't care if it's a Spanish club or the Chinese club or anything like that. If you're paying dues, you should expect some kind of membership benefit. Just like if you're a member of AAA or ARP, you give all kinds of discounts on insurance, etc. We didn't have anything after a while because when CACA first started, the other thing that we did, because of things like discrimination and many of the mainstream uh, life and health insurance companies would not insure Chinese. So CACA started its own insurance program to insure Chinese. And back then, and of course, we had those programs because nobody else would carry them. It's like I'm sure your parents have insurance where they work and you're insured under them. But back in those days, they could not get insurance. So CACA started that. Well, over time, of course, they started covering Chinese and so what did that leave for CACA to do? Well, hardly anything. But the one thing I noticed was all these men and women who served in CACA were veterans of World War II. And I think one of the things I wanted to highlight back then was, well, this is a good time for us to recognize them because in the years prior to my starting this, I had friends who are Filipino as well as Japanese, Nisei, who actually got Congressional Gold Medals for their World War II veterans. So several of them encouraged me, says, you guys are the last ones, the last group in the minority group, if you will, to get this Congressional Gold Medal, and you have to advocate in Congress. And of course, as we all kind of can look back through who has received the Congressional Gold Medal, not only Nisei and Filipino, but we had the Native American Code Talkers, Indian groups who received theirs. We had the Tuskegee Airmen, African Americans who received theirs. And of course, women air service pilots also received Congressional Gold Medal before the Chinese Americans did. So just getting back to what we had to do, and this is the thing that when you study government or political science, how do you pass a bill in Congress, right? What's the mechanism for doing that? Well, first of all, you need people to help you lobby, if you will, and so you need to get a bill introduced into Congress, you need the support of House and Senate members. So you're looking to be co-sponsors of the bill in both houses. So we need a Senate and a House representative from both parties to sponsor the bill, which we did. And the hard part, I think, is trying to get everyone to agree on the language of a bill, right? So we finally introduced two bills, one in the House, HR 2358, and in the Senate bill was Senate Bill 1050, and they both were advocating for Chinese American World War II veterans to receive the Congressional Gold Medal. And if you go to the public law is 115-337. So 115 means it's 115th session of Congress. So it's that session of Congress. I think today we're at the 117 or 18 session of Congress. So every session of Congress is 2 years. And so if you don't get the bill passed in the one session of Congress, it has to be reintroduced again. So we were very, very, very fortunate to have had the help of some really wonderful people who joined our team and helped us advocate. And the ones who did actually had the most impact were actually the retired Chinese American generals, Army generals, and rear admirals who served. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen or been in the company, and I know you know Major General Ted Wong now.
Mm-hmm.
You've interviewed him. So Ted actually came on the project very late in the game, so he didn't get to experience walking the hill of Congress like the rest of us did. But Ted's a wonderful person to work with as far as presenting the medals to all the veterans. So we had to have those guys walk the hills with us, and they were just wonderful because they're able to open doors that most of us would not be able to, because the biggest challenge is you need 2/3 of each house. So 2/3 of the 100 senators is 67, and 2/3 of the House is 290. So the Senate was not that challenging. I mean, it was challenging, but we were able to get to that number pretty well in the first year. It's the second year when we knew we had to get the House of Representatives on. So here's the challenge. There's a lot of Chinese in Texas. I mean, there are a lot of Chinese constituents in Texas. There are a lot of Chinese constituents in California, as well as New York. So what other states can you think of where you get your listen to you? You can advocate. How many other states can you think of? Well, think about it. How many Chinese do you think live in Montana or Idaho?
Yeah, probably not that
where I'm
many.
going at. Right. So you see that in some of those states, it's very difficult to get their member of Congress to sign on to these bills because they say, why should I support this bill? I don't even have any Chinese in my district or any Asians in my district. So it becomes a real challenge there. And as I said, I think with the help of a lot of I call them general officers. These are the people who are retired generals and admirals and all that kind of thing. They were able to help us, get the bill passed. So when the bill is finally passed within 2 years, it's a miraculous event when you think about any bill that gets passed in one session of Congress. I mean, it's almost impossible to think about, but we were very fortunate to have had that happen. And so one of your questions was, well, how does that feel? Well, relieved. I won't necessarily say I was happy. I was just relieved because the timing just worked out well enough for us, because when you have to get these bills signed at the last minute, and it also has to be signed by the president, which at the time was President Trump, they were getting ready to go on recess because if you look back in the last few years, there was the government partial shutdown that's coming around too. So as that happens, the government runs out of money, everybody goes home, blah, 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 and all that. So we were very fortunate to have the bill passed. So that's the good news. The challenge now for us was trying to locate all of these families who had a veteran who served in World War II. And so I think that's been the big challenge. And it was the big challenge when we were actively looking for them, because we know that about 20,000 Chinese Americans served in World War II out of a population back in 1940 census said there were about 100,000 Chinese in the U.S., including Hawaii, which at the time was not a state, but you counted that as well. So when you think of 20,000 out of 100,000, that's 20%. That's a large percentage of your population to be serving. And on top of that, I think our history, if you kind of recall that, the Chinese Exclusion Act was also in effect because that started in 1882 and was still in effect during World War II. And it was finally repealed in 43, I think it was. And it was a response to the fact that the Chinese government, the U.S. needed the Chinese government to help them, beat back or defeat the Japanese back then. So they said, well, we'd be glad to help you out, except you have this exclusion law that prevents our people from coming to your country. So they finally repealed it. And not to say that it finally got repealed, but it wasn't exactly that. There was an overwhelming number of Chinese who were allowed into the country anyway, because the following year after it was repealed, they let a grand total of 105 Chinese come immigrate into the country. So it wasn't a whole lot of people, but I think the history just kind of lets us know that it's always been a challenge for Chinese to be accepted and recognized for the things that we do. I mean, we're great about recognizing ourselves for being STEM people, doctors, engineers, inventors, that kind of thing. But as far as contributing to the national good and the defense of the country, most people don't even realize that we have had Chinese who have served since the Civil War. So
Yeah. Um, and obviously, like hearing all of that, I can tell like how difficult it was. And also, like, since I actually took government class last year, we also kind of
mhm.
like learned about the whole passing bill and the process of doing that. And we had like a project, and I think some people we could like either like email our representatives, and like some people chose to like write bills, but then a lot of them like quickly found out how difficult that was. So yeah, I can definitely imagine like how much work that would have been. And then so with that being said, like why was that so important to you? Like why was it so important to you to go through all of that to pass this bill so that they get recognized?
I think originally it was with the intent that I recognized the people who are members of CACA, those individuals, because I knew that through their example of serving, demonstrating patriotism, because that's what they really wanted to do. They came to the country. Some of them, 40% were not even citizens who served in the military, and yet they wanted to demonstrate their patriotism and their loyalty to the country by coming over here. And one thing they did was they said, when the U.S. needed help, many of these men enlisted. Many were drafted as well, but I think they wanted to demonstrate that. So I think that's the one thing that I would say is that because we were pretty much an unknown entity of service to the military in our country back then, is that maybe by letting people know this through things like what you're doing and that this bill's been passed now, that we let people know that what is the deal with all the hatred towards us. I mean, we've
Yeah.
been contributing to this country for many years. Many people don't see us, actually, even in the big cities. I mean, we can all travel around without any issue, but even in the smaller cities, like I said, in Nebraska or Idaho or Montana, you don't see very many Asians. So there's not a tendency to understand who we are, that we are, I hate to use the word perpetual foreigners, but that's only because of the way we look. It's not because of how we talk or how we act or what we agree or disagree upon. So I thought it was important for us to highlight the importance of the fact that these men and women served side by side with everyone else to defeat a common enemy who was, going to infringe upon our democracy and freedom and our rights. I mean, who knows what would have happened if they didn't win the war back then? And as you know, many people have called that generation, of which our Chinese Americans are part of, America's greatest generation, because they set not only an example, because they also became the people who were the hardest working, who kind of set the stage for much of the society that we have today. And so I think it's important for us it's important for me to, said, well, we need to do this for those folks who set the example for us. They made it easier for us, and a lot of us who are here today owe it to them for what they did. And
Yeah.
if I can just inject one kind of story about why I kept this thing going for myself. And, I think anytime you take on a tremendously challenging project like this or effort, you get a lot of people who say they want to help you, but they don't. Okay, that's just life. And when the hard work comes, is when the real people who have character, who believe in what you're doing, step up and help. And I always thought that one of the things when I was younger than where you are today, back in middle school, um, probably back in elementary, I had a couple of friends that were good friends of mine, and I didn't have I did the typical Asian thing. I was very good in school, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the things I thought was really interesting was I had two friends, one Caucasian, one Hispanic guy, and we had talent shows back when we were in elementary school. You had talent shows, I think, didn't you? Back in
Yeah.
those days, what do you do? Oh, I can dance, or I can sing, or I can, those kind of things. Well, my friends were actually they were comedians. they were
Oh.
they were like comics. They're funny. I mean, but me, I'm not funny. So, but they decided to enlist me to help because I could deliver the straight lines. In other words, I do the straight lines, they do the funny lines, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things I found out was the funniest guy I knew was the Hispanic guy. His name was George Colunga, and for the many years that I knew him into high school, actually, he was about the funniest person I knew. But after I went off to college, I found out that he ended up joining the U.S. Marines, and that's during the Vietnam War period. And to the extent that we owe people like George Colunga, who served in the military, our very existence is what kind of kept me going many, 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 many days and nights and months and years with keeping this project going. Because what he did, he was eventually he was killed in Vietnam. Actually, I didn't find this out until a mutual friend of ours told me, and it made me stop and think for a while about how I knew him, what he did for me. He kind of brought me a little bit out of my shell. I mean, being an Asian kid. I mean, is there comedy in your family? I mean, you may have a funny family, but I mean, are jokes told around your dinner table very much? I don't know. Maybe you guys have a funny family, or maybe you guys have a little humor in your family. Most Asian families don't have much humor. They don't think of humor as being something that's a good quality. But anyway, so I thought about this about him, and I said, if it not for him, people like him serving in the military, defending our country, I would not be able to go to school. I would not finish my college. I could not, start a career, start a family, do the things I do this project. And so I pretty much dedicated my whole thing about this project to people like him who gave me an opportunity to do something worthwhile. I mean, this project it's not an economic gain for me for sure, but it's something that I felt like important to do for us. And so I've kind of dedicated this thing to him more than anything else, because it's people like him who give us those kinds of opportunities that we take for granted for the most part. Everybody thinks, oh, I'm 16, I'm 17 years old. I can live forever. I'll never get sick, that kind of stuff. And so I think it's important for us to all have something that kind of grounds us and keeps us like thinking about, what makes it possible for me to do the things that I do, and live the life that I live, because I'm very fortunate. I mean, we're all very fortunate. I mean, it's one of those things. So that was one of the really good things I thought about in working on this project, is that, like I said, I'm not in the military, but I felt like this was a way to support someone who was in the military, as my friend, and of course all the veterans in our database. And just to let you know, and I'm sure my dad and my father-in-law wouldn't care one way or the other, but they were both World War II veterans. They're both no longer alive, but they won't get mad at me if I say it this way. But I didn't do this for them. Actually, I didn't do this for them necessarily. They would not want me to do it for them. And really, I would have failed probably if my only focus was on them. I got to get my dad and my father-in-law Congressional Gold Medal. No, it doesn't work that way. It's more because I think of the bigger. You have to think of the bigger picture of people who actually died. We have a lot of Chinese Americans who actually died in World War II. And if you don't mind me sharing this one story about one, there's a story. The Seventh Army, they served in World War. They served in France, and what happened was this young man, this Chinese soldier, he actually jumped on a grenade to save his family. To save his unit. And of course, when they all came back, they recognized him, and they decided this was something they needed to tell everyone else about, that there was a Chinese American who died by saving the rest of his unit by jumping on a grenade. the sad part about it was that he was buried there in France, but they finally were able to bring him back to the Chicago area. But they never found his parents. That's the sad part about it. They never found his parents. They don't know what happened to them. So yeah, he's one of the many stories that we kind of talk about a little bit amongst ourselves of Chinese Americans who actually served and sacrificed for everyone else.
Yeah, that's really incredible. And I just think like these stories really like sometimes you just hear about like I guess like a lot of people participated, but you don't really hear like the actual things that they did. And I think those are the things that are like
Yeah.
really impactful. Um and yeah, so that's why like I'm kind of doing this to like learn more about it because I feel like we definitely
Yeah.
lack a lot of those stories in a lot of ways. And I think I want to talk more about something you kind of already mentioned, but
Mm-hmm.
just like the discrimination against Asian Americans or
Mm-hmm.
Chinese Americans especially.
Mm-hmm.
So just beyond like the military scope, have you or like anyone you know been like discriminated against because you or they are Chinese American?
Um, well, let me preface what I'm going to say by what I know the experiences of those Chinese who did serve in the military. Some will obviously say they were discriminated against, mostly because they looked like the enemy to some
Mm-hmm.
extent, right? I mean,
Yeah.
being confused for Japanese and also, so for the most part, the military tried to keep most Asians out, and when I say Asians, mostly Chinese who served, Chinese and Filipinos, out of the Pacific region. So most of them went to Europe, served in the European theater. But there are other, Chinese Americans who served who did not experience any discrimination. So what was the difference? I don't really know the answer to that question. I don't have anything to say, except I think it may be just doing your job sometimes is all you need to do to be part of the team, right? You do you do what you're assigned to do, and everybody does what they're assigned to do, and everybody's happy. I think possibly, who knows? But as far as myself, so basically, I grew up in a time when I think there were not very many Chinese in Houston, and anybody you knew was related to you, right? So you pretty much knew everybody who was there. As time goes on, I would say it this way. I won't say that I never experienced any discrimination as I was growing up. There were some cases, but nothing, violent or anything like that. Mostly, little name calling and stuff like that. And you just let it go. You don't with not going to get into a big argument over them. Besides, most of the call us names anyway, so you're not going to go and pick a fight with somebody. So you got to be smart enough to do that. But as far as other discrimination, I think it didn't occur to me of discrimination until actually I went to college. Didn't experience much of it in high school or in the public school or K through 12. But once I got into college, this was when I really experienced it. And it wasn't anything overt either. Actually, it's a matter of people when you walked into a restaurant or a place where there had probably not very many Chinese were, they would stop and look. It's kind of like, okay, what's the deal? And so it's just mostly that you don't get a whole lot of the over now. Did my parents have discrimination? Probably so. I wouldn't be surprised, but I don't really know what the real answer is, except what I think we at least tried to agree to some extent that if my feeling is if you're kind of in the minority, people can accept a certain number of the minority, right? Of any minority, it doesn't matter which one you are. It's when there becomes more and more and more, then they get a little threatened. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Have you felt that before? If you get too many of something or some group, everybody feels threatened. But why is that? I think it's mostly because, and I'm not going to say it's our own fault, but in a sense it is. If we decide we're not going to participate in mainstream things, right? Then I think we act like we are not going to participate, so we don't belong. We act like, well, we do belong. I mean, so you have to be part of I'll say the larger society, the larger picture of things. So you have to participate in various in your case, in high school and clubs that are not just Chinese or Asian centric. They have to be other groups to be involved with, and I think that's the important part of every, because it makes people feel more comfortable once they know more about you, right? I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's the whole point. I mean, I can walk into a grocery store and people won't talk to me if they're looking for something because they don't think I speak Chinese. They don't think I speak English. They never heard me talk.
Hmm.
So our area is very interesting. We have a lot of Russians. We have a lot of different, Hispanic, of course. And so it's funny when a Caucasian person wants to talk to another Caucasian person, and it turns out that one Caucasian person is Russian and they don't understand English. And so what did that help? And so I was kind of laughing because I walked by this person several times in the store. And so, but
Hmm.
I think discrimination, it's I won't say never, but pretty much it's never going to go away because it's just what it is. It's just how people are built. What is their framework? What are they involved with? What is their experience around? What is a person's experience around an Asian person? Their only experience may be. I'm just going to use a probably bad example, but if you take the example of a bad Asian driver, and that's all they know about, they'll think all Asians are bad drivers, right?
Yeah.
So that's their only experience. And so what do you expect them to? I'm not saying it's right to feel that way, but that's how people are. People are just people. They can change their mind as well if it was a good experience. So um yeah, I don't have the answer. I'm just trying to live, live in the space that you're given and try to get in the space of everybody else and try to help. So
Yeah. I definitely agree with the point that like discrimination will probably like always exist. Um, but also like in another, I guess, point of view, like even if it always exists, I guess we shouldn't just accept it as normal.
correct.
And we should still like do things to, I guess, help alleviate that discrimination. Um, I would love to know what are some ways you think that America or just like the general public could do to ensure better equality for Chinese or Asian Americans.
Uh, people think that passing laws against discrimination change people's minds. Okay, it can in some situations, especially like maybe business or housing or employment, those kind of things. And those are things that someone probably can control or the outcome of. At the same time, I don't believe just passing laws is going to be the answer to the long-term issue of why or how you can help um, uh, alleviate the whole problem of eliminating discrimination. I still think that it has to be a one-on-one, group in a group, trying to involve other people in your sphere of influence that helps people change their minds about certain things. Now, there are certain things you probably won't be able to change minds about people at all because their experience with certain groups is just going to be in their minds. I mean, look at ourselves today. I mean, there are many mostly the older generation of Chinese Americans to this day still hate Japanese because of the war. It's been all because of the war. And if you read some of the books, the things like Rape of Nanking, where all the Japanese soldiers raped people in China, et cetera, et cetera. All those things are just terrible images in people's minds, right? I mean, they're not. You can't blame them for getting rid of that. They can't get rid of that image because it hurts them. And the same thing is going to be so how do you help them overcome that? I don't know the answer to that question. It's just very difficult, but
Yeah.
if you can come back to today and decide, if there's a person in need, are you going to bypass them if they're not Chinese? I mean, if are you going to help them if they're Chinese or not Chinese? Sometimes you don't mind helping them if they're Chinese necessarily because you don't fear too much, but I think a lot of these things can be easily resolved through just more social interaction with other groups, and that
Yeah.
way they're not so fearful, or they understand more about you. I don't think everybody's fearful. I think just a lack of understanding of people that you know, I mean, there's a lot of Chinese that don't like me, and there's a lot of Chinese I don't like. Because it's not because I discriminate them. They're just not very nice people.
Yeah.
I mean, right. I mean, and then there are many African American, individuals that I like and can certainly work with, and the whole thing. And I empathize with their situation. But we've all had some degree of discrimination. I'm just gonna say it this way: everyone has some amount of racism in their mind and heart. Something puts that into themselves, and so yeah, people say they're not racist. There's something there that says that they don't, that contributes to where there's racism, or where there's just I don't like certain people, maybe, that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
it should not be about race. It's mostly about individual thing, but it is what it is.
Mm-hmm. And then I also wanted to kind of just talk about the project that I'm doing and maybe like your opinions on it. So I think you kind of have a pretty good understanding of what I'm doing. I'm basically like doing different portraits of veterans and then like talking to their family members or just people involved with like Chinese American World War II veterans. So do you have any suggestions on like how I can kind of maybe like expand my network maybe, or just better achieve my goal of like cementing the place of Asian Americans in American society?
So do you want to concentrate more on the artistic side of doing portraits, or do you want to do more of a kind of a written narrative, or do you want to do more oral history interviews, or talking to people who are maybe not necessarily the veteran, but maybe the child of a veteran, something like that? I mean, I can help you take it lots of different ways. I mean, there's several portraits you could do of people who are no longer alive, but I have their pictures, and just like Elsie's picture you have right there that you did. I mean, some of the ones that are, I would say, less known would be kind of interesting to do. The one of the private in the Army that I was talking about, I have we have his picture, and then that would be one way to help kind of get his story out. And then there's there's only one Chinese American who's a Medal of Honor winner or awardee, Francis WWII. And so you can do a little feature about him, and you can also concentrate on other women as well in that. I mean, another interesting story, and I've learned a lot. Like I said, I was a STEM person. I mean, learning about World War II, was nothing in our history books about, especially about Chinese Americans, right? Especially even Transcontinental Railroad. You don't even hear in your history books that Chinese were involved with, except a little bitty part, maybe they talked about Chinese. But there was a picture of, well, let me tell you about two stories. So one is that a grandson sent me that his grandmother had of a flag. So it's just a simple little handkerchief, and the handkerchief had like 5 stars on it. And I said, "What's that? What does that mean? What does those 5 stars on that little handkerchief mean?" He says that that flag or that handkerchief was given to her because each star represents a son or daughter that was in World War II. So she basically had 4 sons and 1 daughter that served in World War II. And what she did with that handkerchief was she hung it outside her window. So people walked by her house knew that here was a family who had 5 children serving in World War II, all at the same time. I mean, can you imagine if you're a mother, you got 5 kids that are out somewhere in harm's way for all that period of time? So, that brings a whole lot of things home. And I don't know if you're familiar with that movie called Band of Brothers. They're looking for these 2 brothers that served in the war. So that one got killed. They didn't want to make sure they saved the other one, got him out of harm's way by rescuing him. So we have so many stories actually of multiple brothers and sisters serving in World War II from the same family. So there's at least one family that has 4 brothers that served, and actually there's multiple families that have at least 2 either a brother, sister, or two brothers, or something like that. And then we have a couple of stories of people who actually got married in the service, and so they're both World War II veterans that got married. So
Mhm.
I think the neat thing about some of these photographs, Melody, is that these were all really, really nice looking people. I mean, when they're younger, I mean, they look great. I mean, I said, wow, these are almost like Hong Kong movie star quality looking people, you know.
Mhm.
So these are all
Yeah.
in their uniforms and all that. So that was one good story there. Then another project is we've actually been able to reunite some families who hadn't seen each other in a long time, but they did not know each other had a veteran in their family. I mean, who talks about that when you're growing up? You know, you said, "Oh, my dad's a veteran." No, nobody says that. After a while, you come back from the war, you get married, you have kids, and the kids don't really even know that the dad
Mhm.
or mom served. And so we had in our book, and one of these days I may be able to find a way to show you a copy of this book. So we have this kind of book that we put together, and each one of them has stories. There's 500 stories. Each page is written by the family. They submit a tribute to their dad. So I mean, here's 500 stories right here. You could almost pull out of our book and find these folks. But one of the pictures has three veterans, two in the Army, one.
Mhm.
It turns out that each one of those men whose picture is in that. So the first one sends it in, and it's in the book, and the person sees another person across the country sees that picture, and they said to me, "Hey, can you put me in touch with that family who put that picture in there?" I said, "Why?" She said, "Because my family has the same photograph in their album." So it turns out there's another guy that's in that picture that actually was related to them. They were like second cousins, I think, something like that.
Whoa.
Yeah. And so 2 days before the deadline for registering and approving veterans, a third lady contacts me. She says, I have a photograph. All I have is a photograph of my dad. I said, really? I said, why don't you send it to me and let me take a look? Well, the funny thing is that third person has the same photograph in her. So we eventually put them all together, and I think they saw each other in Washington D.C. last year. Uh,
Wow.
so, just some really really nice feel good stories about how we kind of pulled some families back together, and none of them knew each other's father was a World War II veteran because it's just something they don't talk about. Matter of fact,
Mhm.
that's a common theme throughout our entire work is that many of the children did not even know their dad or did not know much about their dad's service because most of I mean honestly nobody wants to talk about war. It's really not a
Mhm.
very pleasant subject, and so I think that's probably why they didn't talk about it. But as they come to find out, they're very proud of their dads and uncles and aunts and all that who served during the war. So you have a real treasure trove of information that you could uh, dig into, Melody, and let me know how you want to take it. You want to pick a certain group, you want to pick a Navy, or maybe pick somebody. We don't have very many Marines. We had a few Marines. We had some merchant mariners. As a matter of fact, there's the merchant mariners of World War II also received a Congressional Gold Medal. So we have some Chinese who actually have two Congressional Gold Medals in their house, one from ours and one
Whoa.
from Merchant Marines. And we have one guy that has three because he was also an Army Ranger. So you don't hear very many Chinese who are Army Rangers. I mean, these are really, I guess they call themselves tougher than Marines. So you know,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
just let me know how you want to do this. Be glad to help out in any way. I'll just have to clear it with the people who if they're available and all that kind of thing. But I'm
Yeah.
sure they'd be glad to help.
Yeah. I'll definitely keep in touch with you after this. And
Sure,
yeah,
sure.
hopefully I know I'm pretty busy during the school year, but
Yeah.
like just in my free time, I would love to dive even deeper into this and know more about these stories. And
Oh
then
yeah. This is part of it. Yeah. This
yeah.
is part of the whole reason why we're doing the project is to get the education component out about these individual stories.
Yeah. And finally, I just wanted to ask if you had anything to say to the younger generation of Americans.
Have anything? What? I mean, you better repeat that. I missed that part.
Oh, yeah, just like any words to give to like younger generations of Asian men.
I mean, there's so many things you can do that it's almost unlimited. You know, the options today, Melody, people, you know, kids in your generation, young people who are trying to find out what they want to do. Sometimes I think too many choices is too many. And so you narrow yourself down. I think you find something that you really love doing. And, you know, I also understand the Chinese narrative that says, oh, you become an artist, you'll be poor all your life, or you become a some in music, you'll be, you know, all that kind of thing. I think it has to go hand in hand. You have to be happy doing, you should be productive in society. That's number one. You should be productive. All these projects like this I'm doing are fine, and I think they can expand, you know, your scope of learning, and you should never stop learning. But at the same time, I think you should always find a way to contribute to the betterment of the people around you. And then as the circle gets a little bit bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, that anything you do has an impact. And I'd say that find something that has impact upon people. I mean, you know, nothing like, you know, dramatically, like, you know, but something that affects somebody that's going to make them better, or make it what you do better for them as well. And so I guess I would say, in terms of this project that I've been doing, I won't know most, I won't know most 95% of these people. But the fact that I know that when I get an email or something, or, you know, phone call from some of them, they're extremely to recognize their grandfather, their father, their uncle, their aunt, with kind of a last tribute for those guys who are, you know, women that are older, that that's had an impact upon their families. And I think that's a nice thing, because some of these stories that I've heard them tell me about when they've talked about their dad who's no longer alive, some of the families even said to me, says, you know, the last Christmas we had, we ended up talking about our dad the entire time, because we've never talked about him, and we've never had to sit down at family dinner and actually had a family conversation. And so their dad became the focal point, because now they were able to share more about their dad. So whoever knew something about what their dad did in service was able to talk about that, and they're extremely proud, I mean, of that. And I think that's the good thing about it. I mean, as a Chinese American, where you're only like, what, 6, 7, 8% of the population, the fact that these men and women had an impact like they did, and they certainly did, because most of them were very much blue collar workers, in terms of working in a Chinese restaurant or a store, or laundry and that kind of stuff. I mean, it's a lot of hard work.
Thank you so much for doing this.
You're welcome,
Yeah,
Melody.
good
Take care.
talking to you.
Okay, bye-bye.